The atmosphere was cold. It was so cold. It felt as if the air itself was close to freezing over. Big sis, we have spent so many years together. Are you just going to throw it all away? Lazy Cat pleaded with red eyes. Queen's eyes moved. With a frosty tone of voice, she said, "When we built the team, I told you what my aim was. I told you that all I wanted to do was hunt super creatures. I have no warmth or love for the friendships and relationships we have established in our time together. This is who I am." After that, Queen turned around and left. Tyrant clenched his fists but did not speak another word. Sky Jealousy was merely dim, left speechless by the whole affair. Tears began to flow from the corners of Lazy Cat's eyes as she nervously nibbled at her own lips. Huang Fu Pingqing tugged at Han Sen to go after Queen. Despite their speedy pursuit, they weren't quick enough, and by the time they exited the shelter after her, Queen was gone. "Sometimes, even I cannot understand how she works," Huang Fu Pingqing sighed. "She must have had a reason to say what she did. Can you think of anything?" Han Sen inquired with a bewildered look. Queen was raised by the Huang Fu family, so it was only natural for him to expect Huang Fu Pingqing would know something. With a wry smile, she just shook her head and said, "Not me." In the Ares Martial Hall, there are only two people who are close enough with her to ask such personal questions. Han Sen nodded, acknowledging that she was referring to Huang Fu Xiongcheng and his wife. "I'm going to the mountain. Since they won't be tagging along, it'll be too difficult for me to protect you. You should return to the shelter," Han Sen said. This time, she did not object. She merely nodded. After splitting up with Huang Fu Pingqing, Han Sen rode Golden Growler to the Sky Pillar Mountain. He was unconcerned with what others thought, and his plan wasn't going to change on account of some drama. Han Sen left White Sand Shelter and ventured off into the mountainous regions. Before long, his passage was suddenly blocked by three people. These three were Tyrant, Sky Jealousy, and Lazy Cat. "Out of us three, I want you to pick one."
Tyrant coldly looked at Han Sen.
"Pick one for what?"
Han Sen asked. "Combat."
"If you beat one of us, I will allow you to join," Tyrant answered, with a proud tone of voice.
Han Sen log head.
"Sorry, I don't even want to join your team. I'm not interested in humiliating you in combat either." The three of them were no ordinary evolvers. They were strong, and they were the most elite there were. But despite their accomplishments, Han Sen thought there was still no point in joining their team, for despite their unity, they still lacked the ability to slay a super creature. After that, Han Sen wished to walk past them and continue his venture. Lazy Cat was enraged. She summoned a dagger and attacked Han Sen in her fury, yelling, "You only say this now, do you? You have deliberately tried to sabotage our group. I am going to kill you, you asshole." Lazy Cat was incredibly quick, and streams of wind were visible as she ran. Although she was not as strong as the White Tiger, her speed surpassed any evolver Han Sen had ever seen.
Young.
Han Sen did not even need to turn around. The ancient sword that was in his right hand swooped around his back and stopped Lazy Cat's killing dagger in its tracks. Lazy Cat shouted and spun like a tornado to Han Sen's other side, with her dagger now aiming for his neck. Han Sen's body did not move, but his sword did. Effortlessly, it swung around and put an end to the course her dagger followed. Lazy Cat's small body had a wild, primitive energy. Her right hand summoned another dagger, which targeted Han Sen's waist. Han Sen lowered the ancient sword in his hand, using the hilt to deflect her attack. Like a hurricane, Lazy Cat started spinning around Han Sen. Her two daggers were thrusting and slashing from every angle at ridiculous speed. But Han Sen was still standing, seemingly unfazed. With just one sword and one hand, he moved them around, deflecting every single strike with the precision of a machine. The way Han Sen responded almost seemed casual and unconcerned. The sounds emitted by the clashing of the dagger and ancient sword rung out far and wide, with nary the smallest break. With remarkable efficiency, Han Sen had managed to block every single attack Lazy Cat made. She couldn't even nick his clothing. After Tyrant and Sky Jealousy observed what was happening, they wanted to join in. Lazy Cat employed the power of the wind, and her daggers were unbelievable as a result. But here, Han Sen had effortlessly deflected every single attack. The power he possessed was something else. Cat, fall back. Sky Jealousy pulled out his soft sword, which reached out for Han Sen like snow. He's mine. Leave him to me. Lazy Cat's fury for Han Sen ruining her relationship with Queen showed no sign of going away anytime soon. Han Sen's mascot sword continued to block and deflect every single one of Lazy Cat's attacks, but with the approach of Sky Jealousy, Han Sen had to summon his Silver Snake sword. Sky Jealousy's soft sword was infamous for its ability to grow hard and soft on a whim. When he approached Han Sen, it shot out a white, frosty miasma to freeze him. Unfortunately for Sky Jealousy, this manner of attack was useless against someone like Han Senator. His jade skin made him nearly invulnerable to all frost-based attacks, and when it came to sword fighting, Han Sen was better on nearly all counts. It was only now that Han Sen noticed that, after unlocking his gene lock with jade skin, his speed and strength were the best they could be. His speed was no less than Lazy Cat's, but he was superior in every other facet. Han Sen excelled due to his balance. He wasn't lacking in any specific department, and he was strong in every aspect. Despite going up against two people, Han Sen was still not at a disadvantage. He didn't even fight back. All he did was remain where he was, deflecting attacks and being as defensive as possible. Tyrant's face displayed a mixture of emotions as he witnessed the battle. He had previously looked down on Han Sen, believing him to be worthless. He had never guessed Han Sen possessed such power. To fight two people simultaneously and not sweat, with no obvious depletion of power, was an impressive feat. But still, Han Sen was not fighting back. Tyrant gritted his teeth and his body shone with the color of gold. He summoned his black lance and, like a toxic dragon, he lunged towards Han Sen.
Young.
Han Sen's ancient sword clashed against the black lance. They were both pushed back, which gave neither of them an advantage. Tyrant joined in the fight. All three of them fought Han Sen, with no winner yet looking likely to be determined. It was a frightening sight to see, and their inability to overcome one solo battler left the three attackers with conflicted emotions. Han Sen's speed was on par with Lazy Cat. His strength was no worse than the strength-excelling Tyrant, and Sky Jealousy's frost air had no effect on him. This was the first time they had ever come across such a powerful human, and he seemed stronger than Queen herself. He was indestructible. Under the barrage of attacks from three people, the swords in Han Sen's arms danced with alarming speed, accuracy, and efficiency. As time went by, the realization they could not beat him began to sink in. Their unified push was slowly starting to become a unified retreat. Han Sen was pushing his dual skill to the max, but he couldn't afford to remain defensive forever. Switching to the offensive, Han Sen's sword swung around like the frantic flapping of a butterfly. The strength and power of each swing was unbelievable, however, and his opponents hastened to take a few more steps back. Despite going up against three accomplished evolvers, Han Sen was emerging victorious.
Young.
A lance fell, a sword dropped, and a dagger broke. Tyrant, Sky Jealousy, and Lazy Cat were robbed of their weapons. With pale faces, they now looked at the motionless Han Sen with eyes of resentful surprise. Despite their combined effort, they lost the battle. Han Sen's fitness was so strong he was barely human, they thought. His dexterity and proficiency in every aspect of combat was at the pinnacle of what they believed a person could achieve. Every sword skill Han Sen used was a raging one, blazing with an unimaginable power. None of the three could withstand the barrage of attacks cast upon them. They couldn't retaliate with a display of power remotely resembling what he had done. Lazy Cat's eyes looked lost and devoid of hope, realizing now why Queen so desperately wanted Han Sen to join. His power was terrifying, and none of them were a match. Sky Jealousy's eyes were bewildered. He believed that a person like Han Sen was out of their league, and they were foolish to attempt competing with him. But still, he could not accept that Queen was abandoning them for someone who was practically a stranger. Let's go. Tyrant did not say any more before turning around to abandon the fight he instigated. Who knew what emotions now ravaged his heart? Tyrant never would have thought Han Sen, the person he looked down upon, actually possessed such fantastic talent. And it wasn't just him who had lost to Han Sen, it was the three of them, all in a combined effort. Watching the three of them leave, Han Sen sheathed his sword. Then, he turned around to look at a thicket of trees. He called out, "You can come out now." Queen's slender shadow appeared from behind an ancient tree. She approached Han Sen to whisper, "Thank you." "For what?" Han Sen asked with a smile. Of course, he already knew. She was thanking him for sparing the lives of his attackers. Queen did not reply. She just looked in the direction her three former compatriots had left and sighed. It was rare for Han Sen to see this woman in such a downtrodden mood. The likelihood of seeing her in such a state was far less than seeing her smile. Han Sen thought there was nothing in this world that would even prompt her to frown, but there she was, actually sighing. Sky Pillar Mountain? Let's go. Queen's emotions frosted over once more. Is it really okay for you to just leave them hanging like that? Han Sen really wanted to understand what Queen was thinking. I only require people who are useful to my cause. If one day I find out you are of no use to me, I will leave you without hesitation. Queen started walking ahead and said without looking back, "The same applies to you. If I am of no use to you, please be rid of me." What plagues this woman's heart? Seeing Queen's silhouette step forward, aloof, Han Sen could not help but sigh. Han Sen had many questions weighing on his heart and mind, but he chose not to ask them. It was just like Queen said. She needed his power, and he needed hers. That had to be enough. Killing a super creature solo would be too difficult. Even a person like Han Sen had to consider cooperating with others, and the same was true of elite evolvers like Queen. Sky Pillar Mountain was almost like a spire in its structure and formation. It was difficult to recognize as a mountain from afar, as it resembled some sacred pillar that tethered the world and sky. This semblance had become its namesake. When they reached the mountain's foot, Queen looked at Han Sen with concern and said, "This Sky Pillar Mountain belongs to the Chun family. If you encounter anyone from the Chun family, be wary of Chun Ran in particular." "Is he powerful?" Han Sen had met two people from the Qin family before, Chen Zichen and Zhu Ting. Han Sen had always desired to learn the Chun family's special seven-twist skill, but he never had. Even though Zhu Ting had learned it, being a bastard son of the family, he was tight-lipped about its practice. 80 years ago, Chun Ran unlocked his gene lock, Queen said, and then did not say any more. Han Sen knew how frightening Chun Ran was, merely from hearing his name. The history of this world only went back 100 years. If he unlocked his gene lock 80 years ago, he had to be an old elite. To have been able to train with his open gene lock for 80 years, who could fathom what mighty powers he might have learnt? Even if he hadn't totally unlocked the first gene lock, the amount he had opened it must certainly be more than any other evolver. For Queen to warn him about this person was a testament to his abilities. Han Sen thought Sky Pillar Mountain was huge, and it was nearly impossible to determine an optimal path up. Therefore, he picked a trail at random and began hiking. He also believed their presence would go unnoticed if they climbed the mountain in such a manner. He was wrong, for shortly after they began their trek, a group of people approached them. The leader of the group had gray hair, but his face put him in his 40s. There weren't any wrinkles Han Sen could see, and his body looked toned and well-trained. He was clad in silver armor. He rode a tiger that was 3 meters tall and looked like a bona fide badass. "You there, who has selected to ascend this glorious Sky Pillar Mountain, tell me, why have you not made your presence known to us? Our hospitality knows no shortage." Chun Ran stopped before Queen, leading an entourage of 100 in his wake. "We have only come here to hunt a few sky falcons. It was not in our interest to trouble you," Queen politely said in response. "You speak as if you were unknown to us. The Chun family and the Huangfu family have borne a relationship extending back many generations. You are half of the Huangfu family, which makes you a relative of mine, whether you wish it or not. There is no trouble, I assure you." Chen Ran smiled and said, "The sky falcons of your pilgrimage reside at the top of this mountain, and it is a trying campaign to reach them. I beseech you to allow me and my fellow elderly men to escort you." "Sure," Queen agreed. Chun Ran commanded many of his followers to remain at the foot of the mountain. He rallied 10 others to his side, and with them, Queen and Han Sen resumed their ascent. Han Sen knew that it was not for their own safety that Chun Ran was willing to escort them. He was afraid they would seek to kill the super creatures that resided there. That was okay, however. Han Sen did not wish to slay the super creatures, so he was not against the company. With them leading the way, it would be a much safer journey to the peak. Out of the 10 who followed Shinran, 2 had unlocked their gene locks. But they did not belong to the Qin family. After all, the second god's sanctuary was a big place. Even if the Qin family was large, the chances of them remaining altogether in one area was incredibly slim. Han Sen raised his head but could not see the peak of the mountain, for its top was buried in the clouds. He imagined the mountain resembled a long, slender dragon reaching into the sky. It is fortunate I did not bring the silver fox. If Shinran didn't encounter any creatures on this outing, it would most certainly raise his suspicions about us. Han Sen came here to hunt, and thus he could not bring the silver fox. He left it in White Sand Shelter, in a room he had rented for it to wait in. Sky Pillar Mountain was easily 3,000 meters high, and now they noticed they were walking through a garden of bones. They weren't ordinary bones, as they were grand in size. They were easily a few dozen meters long, each. They looked incredibly powerful, representing exhausted powers from the ancient ages of the world. Although they were merely bones, having long lost their flesh, they were still unnerving to see. The legends say that these bones belong to the creature that once guarded this mountain. When it reigned supreme over this place, no one dared approach for 1,000 meters, Chun Ran explained. A few 100-meter-long bones lay strewn across the mountainside, and much of the area was wreathed with vines. Strangely, they were all shriveled and withered, and many had knitted their way across the bones that were scattered about. Han Sen curiously observed the bones. They had a diffuse, ancient aura of power, one that was dormant, as if it were slumbering. This power seemed to ward away creatures from coming anywhere near them, too. It was not normal for mere bones to be so oppressive. It made Han Sen question whether they were the bones of a long-dead super creature. I wonder if I can cook some soup with the bones? Perhaps I can nab a few super geno points by doing that.
Han Sen wondered.
But after looking at those sinister bones again, he gave up the idea. Still, he walked nearer them to get a better view. Chun Ran saw them both examine the skeletal remains of the guardian hound with great interest. He did not say anything but approached them by the bones. Han Sen inspected them and found that they looked like gray pillars of stone. Some were the size of a barrel, whereas others were as big as a house. The remains were mostly complete, and it looked as if the ancient creature had just died quietly on the mountainside. Chun Ran called a man named Su Dongjin to come forward. He summoned a beast soul sword and struck the bone with it. A great sound rang out across the valleys and mountains of the region, but upon inspecting the bone that was hit, there was not a single mark on it. These bones are incredibly hard. Even with a sacred blood weapon, they cannot be damaged. Su Dongjin sheathed his sword as he explained their strength. This was almost confirmation for Han Sen that these were indeed the remains of a super creature. If they weren't, Su Dongjin's mighty strike was sure to leave a hefty cut. But it was a puzzling conundrum. Why would a super creature simply die here without a struggle, with its bones cast across the mountainside? Chun Ran's people discussed various topics with Queen while Han Sen walked along the spine of the creature on their ascent. The further he walked, the more vines seemed to strangle the bones. It made Han Sen wonder how long it took for the creature to decay, and for the vines to tangle and course their way up and down what remained. When he reached the skull of the creature, it seemed to resemble the skull of a dog. The teeth were terrifying, and picturing how they might have one day gnashed at helpless victims made a chill run down his spine. Han Sen sighed in his heart, saying to himself, "It is a shame only the bones remain. Heaven knows how long these bones have been lying here. They are useless now." When he prepared to leave the bones, he caught sight of a nut hanging from the vines that smothered the skull. It looked dried up, yellowish like the vines it clung to. Han Sen went to take a closer look. It was in fact a gourd. It was small, too, and could easily be picked up in one hand. It seemed to have sprouted as the vines themselves withered. Ordinary people did not care much for plants or botany, but it was a subject of great interest to Han's senator. With so many vines blanketing the skull, he wondered if that soul gourd was special in some way. Han Sen put his hands around the gourd and tried to pry it from the vines. Despite exerting all his strength, he was unable to remove it. With great surprise, he had to ask aloud, "Why is this gourd so stubborn? Give it up, friend. Try as you might, that thing won't ever come off. That dead gourd is as tough as the bones it is attached to. Even if you use a weapon, it'll be to no avail. You aren't the first to inquire about that little thing. Many people have come to try their luck and remove it, and many more with fire. Nothing ever seemed to work." Su Dongjin chuckled as he walked. Hearing him say this, Han Sen only became more inquisitive. He summoned his mascot sword and said, "If it is indeed as you say, I cannot help but try it out for myself." Han Sen slashed the gourd with all his might. It felt like he was striking rubber, and with nary a budge, his sword smacked it like a stone and bounced off. "What did I say, eh?" Su Dongjin resumed his laughter. "You are right. That thing is tough." Han Sen's curiosity only increased, thinking the gourd had to be something quite special. For a gourd vine to be that strong was abnormal. By no right should it have been that difficult to remove. Han Sen put away his sword and grabbed the gourd with his hands while he secretly activated his gene lock. Just as he prepared to pull with all his strength, the gourd fell off into his hands. This was quite the shock for him. Su Dongjin was even more surprised. He couldn't not believe the gourd was now in Han Sen's hand, and all he could ask was, "How did you do that?" For countless years, the vines had wreathed those bones. Countless people had come and gone, each trying their luck at removing the gourd, all with no success. But now, Han Sen had just come along and removed it with a casual pull. This bewildered Su Dongjin. "I have no idea what I did. I only gave it a little pull and poof. It fell off." Han Sen was almost disappointed to have removed the gourd with such little effort. Su Dongjin watched Han Sen pull the gourd off the vine with little to no strength, and the surprise he felt was immeasurable. So immeasurable, it bore repeating. What has transpired here? Chun Ran brought Queen and the remainder of the followers over to see what the commotion was about. Our new friend, Brother Han, pulled the gourd off the vine with his hand. Su Dongjin simply recounted the story to Chen Ran. Chen Ran and the rest of the people weren't sure what to think, but they didn't dwell on the issue. They still believed it to be an ordinary gourd and nothing more. "Brother Han, you look to me like a man of good fortune. Heaven knows how many years this gourd has clung to the withered vines that birthed it, despite the insistence of its removal by others. Now, with you coming along, it seems to have accepted you as its bearer," Chen Ran said with a smile. He continued, "Would you allow me to take a look at the thing in its entirety?" "Of course." Without hesitation, Han Sen passed the gourd to Chun Ran. Chun Ran inspected it for a good while, but could not see anything out of the ordinary. He then gave it to Su Dongjin to look at, who came to the same conclusion. Su Dongjin then passed it back to Han Sen. If this was meant to be, Han Sen should hold on to it. Perhaps it is a treasure of some kind, one whose true value is unknown to us, Su Dongjin said. "It is only a dead gourd, Su Dongjin. It's not some treasure, trophy or souvenir." "Sure. Treasure? I would be hard-pressed to believe so." Han Sen then placed the gourd in his chest pocket. Everyone resumed their trek to the top of the mountain. With Chun Ran's guidance, they managed to avoid many dangerous areas that were prone to the visits of fierce monsters. Because of this, their progress was good and hindrances were practically non-existent. As he walked, Han Sen began to feel as if something was wrong, however. The gourd against his chest began to beat, as if it possessed a heart. Han Sen was shocked. He secretly fingered the gourd, trying to get a better feel of what was in there. A faint pulsing sensation came from the gourd, as if it really did possess a heartbeat. But because it was so weak, Han Sen wouldn't have been able to tell it had one without his seventh sense. Han Sen was so disturbed by the minor revelation that he almost wished to throw the gourd away. Ever since he saw the Lotus Bear 18 blood crystal wasps, he had grown a slight fear of meddling with curious plants. When Han Sen tried to feel it again, the pulse had vanished. No matter how Han Sen held it in his hand, he could no longer feel what he previously had. Strange. I just felt it. Why has it gone?
Han Sen frov ned.
He didn't dare place the gourd back in his chest pocket, so he continued to just hold it in his hand. If something strange were to happen, at least he'd have the time to react. As Han Sen continued walking, his attention remained fixed on the gourd. He could not sense any additional movement, however, and so he started to feel as if he had been mistaken. Strange. It's really strange. What is this thing, I wonder? Han Sen wanted to toss it away and be rid of anything malicious it might harbor inside. But then, his thoughts returned to the possibility of it being some sort of treasure, in which case throwing it away would be a profound loss. Han Sen regretted that he did not bring the silver fox with him. Unlike Han Sen, who was stumped to figure out what the gourd was, the fox would probably know what to do with it. Once he picked it up, a selfish person like Han Sen would not throw it away. He continued holding on to it, planning to give it to the silver fox later. Luckily, nothing strange occurred with the gourd for quite some time. It remained as lifeless as it had been when it was first collected. Every now and again, they encountered a few creatures on the path. Many populated the mountain, and they came in all sorts of shapes and sizes, so it was impossible to avoid a skirmish or two along the way. Without a spirit shelter nearby, however, they did not have to worry about there being large quantities of monsters. They made sure to avoid the hot spots and dangerous zones as marked by Han Ran and his people, and any monster that ventured near, they quickly ran through. There was no chance for Han Sen and Queen to put in a strike or two, which robbed them of the opportunity to collect some loot along the way. But it did not concern them too much because Han Sen was only there for the sky falcons atop the mountain. The mountain was far higher than they initially believed. They ascended its treacherous paths for another 2 whole days without even reaching the halfway point. All of a sudden, the neighing of a horse sounded from somewhere ahead. The faces of Chen Ran and his people drained of their color. Quick, we must hide. Chen Ran went ahead to look for a spot to hide and noticed a narrow crevice in the cliffside they followed. Whatever was headed their way was obviously a creature of some notoriety for the people of the mountain, something wielding a most heinous power. Without hesitating, they followed Chen Ran and his people into the crevice. Not long after, the sounds of a neighing horse came closer and closer. Soon after, something that looked like a horse or donkey riding a red cloud passed by their hiding place. Han Sen snuck a peek at it with a strange look on his face. Before he came to the mountain, he read reports of a horse-like creature riding a red cloud up and down the mountain. This had to be what the reports were referencing. But this creature looked more like a mule. Its hair was shaggy, but shone red and looked good. Its most striking aspect was the red cloud that surrounded it. The mule looked like a holy deity of some sort, and it seemed to be riding down the mountainside carefree and happily. What it was excited about, Han Sen couldn't guess. After hovering around for a minute, the mule soon disappeared. That creature is extremely powerful. Many travelers who have desired passage to the peak have died, trampled beneath its murderous hooves. We have taken you along a trail that bypasses the areas it most commonly traverses, so it was a surprise for us to encounter it here. After waiting until the creature was out of earshot, Chen Ran explained the situation. Queen and Han Sen looked at each other without saying anything. The reason why Chen Ran took a detour was to avoid bumping into this super creature, since he did not want them to know of it. Let us depart, and let us pray we do not encounter it again on our return journey, Su Dongjin said. Everyone in the group had a profound desire to run into that creature again, so their pace up the mountain hastened a considerable amount. Although this mountain was host to many strange phenomena and dangerous creatures, it was fortunate they had not found themselves in any particular danger. After 6 days of hiking, they had almost reached the top. Han Sen took a moment to look down and observe the length of what he had traversed, and he was surprised to see very little. The clouds blanketed the lands below like a sea of white foam. It was as if he had reached heaven or entered a world only fairies lived in. Atop the peak rested a large ancient tree that sprouted branches outward in various directions, resembling a mushroom. The branches were so thick, entwined and long, that they sheltered the entire peak like an umbrella. It was a mighty tree. Han Sen looked at it from afar. Although he had read about the tree's existence before, seeing it in person was a different story. Its magnificence was mesmerizing to behold. Many creatures resided among the leaves. White birds flocked out from among the branches, in varying species and breeds. The giant tree almost seemed like a world all to itself, constructed like a haven for birds. It was incredible. There are thousands of creatures living up there in that tree. There are over 1,000 big bird species, too. The sky falcon you desire is amongst the largest in size, and our last count tallied their number at over 1,000. Sacred blood varieties exist amongst them, as well, Su Dongjin explained. Han Sen furrowed his eyebrows. It was hard to believe so many creatures resided among and beneath the boughs of such a humongous tree. If they approached, they wouldn't only be doing battle with the sky falcons, it would seem. Every nest and chirping bird would be startled, most likely, and that would put them in a lot of trouble. When Queen and Han Sen didn't say a word, Chun Ran smiled and said, "Although the sacred tree has many creatures, fear not." Strangely, each species has its own set of rules and spot inside the tree to live in. The sky falcon, however, lives at the very top of the tree. They will be tricky to hunt, I must confess. Chun Ran and his people showed no interest in helping Han Sen and Queen complete the task that led them there, so they stood back and waited to see how they would perform. When Queen said she had come here to hunt a sky falcon, Chun Ran did not actually believe she could do it. There were many creatures on the tree, and it would be difficult to reach the top. Plus, at the speed the sky falcons flew, strength would not matter if they were unable to hit one. Chun Ran believed Queen had come with a secret desire to search for a super creature, and that the desire to hunt a sky falcon was merely a dishonest excuse. Queen looked at Han Sen, believing it might actually prove too difficult to hunt the sky falcons where they were. Even with sacred blood wings, they would not be able to fly past the other birds that populated the tree. Once they reached the top, many creatures would swarm upon them. Unlock gene lock or not, against such numbers, it didn't seem likely this was a quest they could accomplish. "Old Chun, can we climb the tree?" Queen asked, looking at Chun Ran. Chun Ran smiled and responded, "The tree's trunk is host to numerous bug-type creatures. They are not only tough, but they are in great number, as well. Once the birds come for you, all at the same time, survival would seem unlikely. You guys stay here, I'll go get the sky falcon myself." Before Han Sen arrived, he had already conducted a lot of research, and he knew Chun Ran wasn't lying. But he didn't come here without a plan up his sleeve. Chun Ran was surprised that Han Sen stepped forward to hunt the sky falcons, not the Queen. Su Dongjin and the rest looked at Han Sen, as if they were getting comfy for an unsuccessful, albeit hilarious, spectacle. The Queen's heavenly go was infamous, however, and they thought if the Queen were the one to go, she might have been able to run up the tree, kill the bird she sought, and make it back in one piece. None of them had heard of Han Sen's name before, and when he proclaimed his intent of hunting a sky falcon solo, they thought it was a foolish notion. They believed the deed to be impossible for him and that he'd only cause them grief. The Queen nodded. "Okay, I'll wait for you here." Unexpectedly for Su Dongjin, the Queen agreed instead of preventing Han Sen from going alone. Han Sen summoned his wings and took off into the skies. He circled the tree and then went up to the top. Watching Han Sen fly straight to the top to slay a sky falcon, Chun Ran shook his head and confessed, "This brother Han lacks patience. To rush in like that is a fool's errand, and I fear he will be killed before he even reaches the top. What is this reckless boy doing?" In silence, the Queen looked to the top of the tree and watched Han Sen fly. She was looking forward to seeing how Han Sen would defeat any birds that dared attack him in midair. Although a human could fly with wings, the speed statistic of a pair of wings had no correlation to a person's body. He could not just push it whenever he wanted to, like on land. Dealing with such birds in the air was indeed quite dangerous, and as a result, he most likely would not be able to compete with them. Chun Ran observed the silhouette of Han Senator even though he was from the Chen family, and a learner of 7 twists, even he would not dare provoke a flock of such hazardous birds. To him, Han Sen looked like someone with a death wish. When Han Sen was 100 meters from the top, the birds on the tree noticed him. All sorts of birds flew out from the tree, all targeting Han Senator. It was a terrifying sight to witness. There were so many birds that the skies became black, blotting out the sun and shrouding the area in darkness. It was riveting to watch due to the size of the birds, as well. They were each quite small, and the biggest was roughly the size of a white crane. Most of them were only the size of ravens or sparrows. But size did not matter. and the sight was ugly all the same. No matter how hard they might try, a person with arms and legs could do little to deflect such swarming creatures. Although he was expecting this sort of situation, it was still a shock for Su Dongjin to witness a man be assaulted by so many angry birds. Han Sen, who was still in the sky, had yet to react. He remained fearless and focused on analyzing the flocks of birds to find out which were the sky falcons he sought. According to the information he had obtained, sky falcons looked like owls, just a little slimmer. They were greenish-blue in color and flew incredibly fast. Han Sen knew where the sky falcons lived, and so he continued to observe the top of the tree as he went through the air, so he'd be able to see them the moment they emerged. Just like the information he had obtained suggested, the sky falcons were faster than any other bird. All of a sudden, they came speeding out to the head of the crowd of birds coming for Han Sen. But in the group of sky falcons that came for him, Han Sen could not catch a glimpse of the extra-large sky falcon king in their midst. This puzzled him. In the blink of an eye, a large group of enemies were directly in front of Han Senator. He summoned his ancient sword and silver snake sword, flapped his wings, and challenged the birds head-on. This man is incredibly brave. Seeing Han Sen go up against the birds with equal aggression, Su Dongjin could not refrain from commenting. These words were not complimenting Han Senator. The words were spoken to put emphasis on his recklessness. To go all in like that was insane. And even if he had unlocked his gene lock, performing this deed in such a manner was sure to result in his death. After all, opening your gene lock did not make you invincible. Everything was limited and gauged by an individual's fitness. The same as ever, it was incredibly difficult to survive a situation in which you were surrounded. But in the next second, Su Dongjin and his people abandoned their thoughts and dropped their jaws to the rocky ground. They witnessed Han Sen emerging from the other side of the black bird veil of the sky, with a few dead sky falcons exploding in plumes of red feathers. Han Sen then stretched his wings and escaped the crowd of birds that were now unable to catch up with him. How can this person possibly be so fast? Su Dongjin said in absolute shock. Han Sen was like lightning, zipping backwards and forwards in the air. He was much quicker than the birds that attempted to surround him. Every time he killed a few sky falcons, he'd zip away and gain some distance from the crowd. Even the sacred blood creatures that chased after him could not catch him. Berserk sacred blood wings? Qian Ren squinted his eyes as he suddenly shouted in excitement. After Su Dongjin and his people heard it, they understood. But in this new understanding, they were shocked even more. It was rare to see a berserk sacred blood creature, let alone a beast soul. This was a flying-type berserk, sacred blood beast soul. To purchase such wings would put many young evolvers out of business and bankrupt many shopkeepers. Han Sen was twirling around the skies, killing what he wished with little to no effort. Unable to catch up with Han Sen, the birds couldn't do anything. Across the sea of clouds, Han Sen weaved his way around, killing and dodging every foe he chose to. Cut feathers were beginning to mask the skies as blood painted the ground below. While Han Sen was enjoying his time, a sudden green and blue light flashed. A blue kingfisher appeared, about the same size as someone's palm. Flapping its wings madly, it shot out of the tree. Its speed was no less than Han Sen's berserk sacred blood wings, and it may even have been faster. Although the blue kingfisher was small, it was no less intimidating, and its face looked as if it had murder on its mind. It darted towards Han Sen like a hawk, trying its best to peck him. Is this the Sky Falcon King? Han Sen looked at the kingfisher's face and noticed it appeared similar to a sky falcon, just smaller. The feathers on its body looked as if they had been carved in jade, and its beak was like a hook of crystal. No matter what, Han Sen wanted to kill this new challenger. He unsheathed his silver snake sword and took aim at the kingfisher like a bolt of silver lightning. But at that moment, the kingfisher barrel rolled to the side and dodged Han Sen's strike. The bird circled around and came back for Han Sen. Han Sen saw the flock of birds coming his way, and not wanting to fight them, he flapped his wings and tried to avoid them. The kingfisher was too fast, however, and before Han Sen could gain some distance, it caught up with him. Han Sen cast his dual skill and attempted to kill the kingfisher again. But this foe was much too fast for his berserk sacred blood wings, and far more agile too. Han Sen's sword could not hit it due to his inability to focus. But he couldn't remain still, because he'd be ravaged by the flock of birds if he did. The situation was quickly going pear-shaped. Your partner is talented. He is so talented, he has managed to draw the ire of the Sky Falcon King. Chun Ran squinted at Han Sen, telling himself he would do well to get better acquainted with the young man when he returned. He did not know someone such as that accompanied the queen. With a power so impressive, he would be worth keeping an eye on. Although Zhu Ting used to send information to the Chun family, not very often would his news garner any attention. Thus, very few people were even familiar with his name. Han Sen continued to fight as he fell back, bit by bit. The prospect of winning against the Falcon King of the Sea of Clouds seemed unlikely. Su Dongjin and the rest leaned forward to watch the battle with greater intensity, still caught up in the admiration of his berserk, sacred blood wings. It's no good for him to continue like this. If he exhausts his strength, he'll be in danger, Su Dongjin commented, as he watched Han Sen zip around the sky. Continuing to talk, he said, "Queen, ought we provide him aid?" Su Dongjin's offer to support Han Sen was not out of the kindness of his heart. He saw that Han Sen had attracted the attention of countless murderous birds, and with the majority preoccupied in the pursuit of Han Sen, he and Queen would be free to bag plenty of easy kills. While he was happy to sit and watch, the suggestion of going over there and getting free kills was incredibly self-centered. That was why he extended his offer to Queen. There is no need. Within 30 strikes, the Sky Falcon King will be no more, Queen responded coldly. To the eyes of those who watched, Han Sen was a free-spirited bird himself. He soared the skies with no formation, diving and rising on a whim. Queen was the only one who did not see things like that, however. She could see that Han Sen was calculating each movement, and every time he swerved, turned, or twirled, it was at a destination he had planned. Within 30 strikes, the formation would be complete, and the Sky Falcon King would be slain. 30 strikes? That doesn't seem likely. Su Dongjin continued to watch Han Sen getting chased by the flock of birds. He thought he was doing okay, provided they did not catch him. Chun Ran remained quiet and motionless. He stood off to the side, watching in silent contemplation. An old man like him, unlike Su Dongjin, was able to understand such intricate situations a lot more. That was why he was so surprised at what he was witnessing. How does this kid know how to perform Heavenly Go? Did the Huangfu family teach another? That is impossible. Huangfu Shongqing took a vow. So how could someone else I have no knowledge of or relation with know how to perform Heavenly Go? Chun Ran spoke with a strange look on his face, as his eyes continued to trace Han Sen's movements in the air. A few of the evolvers that watched were counting how many strikes Han Sen had performed, not putting much stock into Queen's claim of him being able to do it in 30 or less. Yeehaw! After the count of 24, Han Sen shouted. Without any prior indication, Han Sen performed a brutal counterattack on the Sky Falcon King. The Sky Falcon King was flying at incredible speed, flapping its wings with a new tenacity in an attempt to dodge Han Sen's incoming strike. It managed to dodge the first sword, but upon doing so, found itself caught up in the pursuing crowd of birds. At that precise moment, Han Sen's second sword came down on it. The silver snake sword was imbued with incredible power and brought down on the Sky Falcon King with a mighty thrust. The Sky Falcon King's greatest asset was speed, but that came at the sacrifice of strength. Its body was weak. When it was hit, its entire backside was sliced open to expose its organs. A hit such as that was guaranteed to ensure its death. Su Dongjin and the others could not move. Han Sen had performed 24 strikes to slay the Sky Falcon King. Now, Han Sen swerved to dodge the next assault of the flock of birds. He made a quick turn and went after the falling Sky Falcon King. He hadn't yet heard the notification tone, confirming his slaying of the beast, so it had to still be alive to some degree. The Sky Falcon King descended directly into the crown of the tree. When Han Sen raced there, the branch that the Sky Falcon King landed upon rebounded. Han Sen reached out his hands to grab the near-lifeless body of the Sky Falcon King and used his force to throttle it. After a vigorous squeeze, the notification finally played. Sacred blood creature hunted. Sky Falcon King. The beast's soul was not acquired. Consume its flesh to obtain a random numeric amount of sacred geno points, ranging from 0 to 10. Han Sen's inability to claim the beast's soul did not come as a surprise. The probability of obtaining one was incredibly low, so it would have been highly unlikely to get it on his first kill. Han Sen was prepared for this, so he wasn't disappointed. With the Sky Falcon King's flesh, he was sure to gain at least 8 sacred geno points, and 8 sacred geno points from a single meal was a generous amount. Han Sen circled the crown of the tree while avoiding the flock of birds that continued to pursue him. He caught a glimpse of what lay beneath the foliage, and when he saw what was there, his pupils shrank in shock. Beyond the dense dressing of leaves, Han Sen saw a bird nest that had been built from branches. The nest itself was not remarkable, but inside the nest, he saw a bird that looked like a raven. It was inky black, and all it did was stare coldly back at Han. Senator Han Sen looked into its eyes and felt a chill. He figured if the raven decided to move and come after him, he'd be gutted alive in no time at all. But the raven did not do anything. It remained where it was, comfy in its nest, watching Han Sen fly past. Han Sen was soaked in cold sweat. He only looked into its eyes, but with his highly attuned senses, he was able to determine how powerful it was. It brimmed with energy, and Han Sen just knew that it had to be a super creature. Han Sen believed he should immediately remove himself from the area and start praying to the gods above for a blessing. He had been so close to the super creature, yet it had done nothing at all. It was a miracle. The more Han Sen mulled over the situation, though, the more he felt something wasn't quite right. The raven super creature was only a few meters away from him, so there was no chance it had not seen him. But if it had indeed watched Han Sen, why would it choose to ignore a free meal? Unless the raven cannot move? This thought flashed through his mind. If the raven is laying eggs, is that why it did not choose to kill me? Aside from that, Han Sen could not think of any other reasons he would be allowed to escape from the raven. But that did not matter to him right now. What was most important was his need to leave the area and return to safety. If the raven did decide to leave its nest, he would be in trouble. Han Sen soared off in the direction of Queen, shouting, "Leave! There is a terrifying creature atop the tree. You have to leave." After that, he swooped down to hit the ground running and return his wings. Queen, without hesitating, joined Han Sen in his hurried departure. "Pa, surely you jest. If there is indeed a terrifying creature aloft in the tree, explain to me how you have returned with nary a wound upon your person." Su Dongjin did not believe Han Sen's words. Chun Ran only frowned, wondering whether or not he should leave and follow Han Sen's unnerving warning. But then, a deafening screech pierced his ears. It was the frightening cry of a raven. Caw, caw. After sounding, a pitch-black raven emerged from the crown of the tree. When it flew out, the rest of the birds that were still airborne, panicking, calmed down and retreated into the tree. The raven creature spread its wings and flew down with its beady eyes peering at them. "Go!" Chun Ran felt a chill run down his spine and issued his command without hesitation. He was the first to start running. Su Dongjin and his people did not dare loiter any longer, and they took off behind Chun Ran. The raven casually glided down towards them, in no apparent rush. It coldly watched Han Sen and the others flee for their lives, its eyes viewing them all like a joke. Its eyes were sullen voids, and after it took off into the air, the mountain descended into an oppressive silence. Han Sen may have led the retreat, but he did not feel safe. A frightening chill latched onto him, and he imagined the beady, stabbing gaze of the raven targeting him. Damn it! What is going on? What has it taken the others so long to get moving? Han Sen was bewildered, but he couldn't spare the time to think it through. The best he could do right now was escape with his life, leaving the mountain behind. Han Sen did not dare summon his wings to fly off. Expecting to outpace a super creature that excelled in flying was a fool's hope. They were all now running down the mountain as best as their legs could carry them. Not once did they see another creature on their rapid descent. There was only the black raven callously mocking them from the sky, watching them all flee in terror. It was the de facto emperor of the skies, that was clear. With its presence, nothing else would dare creep out from hiding. Han Sen looked back and spotted the shadow of the black raven overhead. Although it was not a particularly large creature, it scared Han Sen as any other super creature would. The raven glided casually through the air, not even exerting the effort to flap its wings. It made no difference, however, for no matter how quickly they ran, it still followed them closely. They had run less than a kilometer when the raven cruelly looked upon its prey and let out another heart-stopping screech. Caw! The sharp noise echoed across the land. In the next second, the crow reached a speed that suggested it was teleporting and flew down behind the last evolver in their party. The inky wings looked as if they were able to absorb light and, in a flash, brought it down across the evolver's neck. The raven's speed did not allow the evolver a chance to react, and all it took was one quick slash. The head of the evolver was hewn from her neck. It twirled in the air after its detachment, painting the rocky trail in crimson. With the raven's speed, it could have easily avoided the blood that gushed from the severed head and exposed throat, but it didn't. It allowed itself to be showered in the blood, its eyes squinting in pleasure. It extended its wretched tongue to taste the blood rain that descended from its gruesome kill, and it looked delighted. The people in front watched it happen, and it made their skins crawl and their hair stand on end. The unfortunate victim was not an elite evolver, but she didn't even have the time to fight back, no matter how hopeless such a deed would be. Removing her head so effortlessly was little more than a show of power for the raven. No one dared to slow down, and they continued their rapid descent. But the raven wasn't keen to let any of them go so soon. With its murderous eyes, it painted a few more of the fleeing evolvers. "Help me!" The evolver who was furthest behind could feel what was coming, and could not do anything save cry for help with a trembling voice. But with what had just occurred, who could be blamed for not slowing down and attempting to save him? Everyone had been rattled by their nemesis, and no one dared to slow down to watch it descend upon them. With its unfathomable speed, it had near enough warped behind the previous evolver to decapitate her, and no one wished to suffer the same fate. It was so quick, they wouldn't be able to dodge any potential strike, let alone fight back against the foe. Han Sen activated his gene lock to enable his supreme abilities of sense, but even he was unable to witness it fly down in the manner it did. By the time the raven disappeared, the wing was already slicing through the evolver's neck. The distance it covered, to go from the sky to the running evolver, could not possibly have been crossed through speed alone. Han Sen was beginning to believe it did indeed possess teleportation capabilities. Otherwise, it could not have evaded his senses. Caw! Another screech sounded, and the head of the raven turned towards the mountain trail once more. This time, Han Sen applied greater focus to his senses to analyze the movement of the raven. But it revealed naught. The moment it decided to fly down, it escaped his senses again. The moment the raven re-revealed itself, the head of another evolver was in the process of being lopped off. In this moment of fright, Han Sen was shaken by the sight of Chun Ran running past both him and Queen. The talents of the Chen family are not understated. Han Sen gritted his teeth to push on and keep running. He tried the best he could, but he could not keep up with Chen Ran, who outpaced them all. Not long after, another screech sounded. It was like the tolling of Satan's own dinner bell. Upon hearing it, everyone clutched their chests in the hope it wasn't them who was next up for a deep six holiday. The further behind in the group you were, the tighter the fear gripped your heart. A person who was weaker than the rest was now lagging behind. In this moment, he noticed his position amongst his compatriots. 3 people had been recipients of the raven's wings by this point, and just as he expected a wing to greet his neck, his shaky legs tripped on an exposed tree root.
No.
"Help me! Arg!" The scream of another hapless victim smothered the depleting hopes of escape by those who remained. In truth, they were now fleeing through a valley of death. Han Sen was beginning to realize at the speed they were running, they were all going to be killed before they could even descend halfway down the mountain. The raven was playing with them. It seemed to take pleasure in killing them, and if it wanted them all dead, that was how things were going to go. If they were lucky, they'd only be alive for 1 more kilometer. If we continue going like this, We aren't going to make it. Han Sen slowed his speed down to run alongside Queen. If we cannot beat the beast, there is no way to escape this predicament, Queen said, and Han Sen understood what she was implying. Queen had come to the same conclusion as Han Sen when analyzing the speed of the raven. Try as she might, she was unable to track its attacks. And if they could not do this, they could not fight it. If the raven came for them, only death would quickly follow. How about we split up?
Han Sen suggested. Fråvning. No.
What good would that yield? Queen vehemently objected. With the horrible speed of the raven, it would make no difference. If anything, it would only result in a quicker death. Do you recall the creature riding a red cloud further down the mountain? Queen said. Are you suggesting an enemy of our enemy is our friend? I'm not sure that would work. For all we know, we'll simply end up getting sandwiched between the two. If that were to happen, a grisly death would surely await. Han Sen understood what Queen was suggesting. Well, we have to do something. If all we do is continue to run, we'll die no matter what, Queen objected. Han Sen reconsidered her suggestion, thinking she might indeed be onto something. To keep running would result in certain death, as they were getting picked off one by one. A simple escape was off the table. Even if we tried, the creature that roams these slopes is too far off. For all we know, we may be killed before reaching it. Amidst their discussion, someone screamed from behind. Before the evolver was killed, he had stopped in an attempt to fight the raven. But before he could strike, the wings of the raven was scissoring his neck, leaving a wretched blood fountain stump atop his shoulders. Queen's eyes went cold, and her signature purple light began to flow in and around her body. All of a sudden, a long scream sounded through the air. It was not the work of the raven, but something else. The sound was deafening, drowning out the noise of the mountains and surrounding landscapes. As Han Sen pondered Queen's reason for using her purple light, he suddenly heard the sound of a horse neighing from further down the mountain. Then he heard the stampede of hooves drawing nearer. Something scary was coming their way, and its speed could not be rivaled. Chun Ran was running as fast as his legs could carry him. All of a sudden, the sight of a red cloud appeared in the distance below. It was the creature that resembled a donkey or horse. Chun Ran stopped his flight, but the red cloud monster was already on its way up to strike him at an alarming speed. Chun Ran's long gray hair all stood up and a windstream began to form around his body, circling him. He jumped 10 meters into the air and dodged the incoming attack. He spun around like a pigeon in the air, jumped once more on the air itself, and landed 10 meters away from his foe. Then he started running once more. This entire scene played out over the course of a second. It was flawless, and it went without a hitch. The strength of the Chun family was impressive. The creature did not return its attention to Chun Ran, but instead turned to look at Queen. As it exhaled, red clouds emerged from its mouth. Streaks of a purple flame danced out of Queen's eyes, and her body was cloaked in the same wreaths of purple light. She evaded the monster and proceeded to run downhill. The creature looked as if it recognized Queen. It traced her with its eyes and followed her on her descent without paying heed to anyone else. Han Sen could do little but frown. Their worst-case scenario was coming to life. He did not know what Queen did to elicit the creature's attention, but it was intently locked onto her, with no desire of chasing anyone else. The situation they were in had gone from bad to worse. Another scream erupted from behind, signifying another headless evolver. With more bodies dropping and 2 super creatures now targeting them, their hope of survival was quickly diminishing. All of a sudden, Han Sen saw Queen turn to flee in a different direction. Abandoning their route, it looked as if she desired to lead the creature away from the rest. Han Sen was taken aback by her noble deed, but not wanting to leave her alone, Han Sen turned to follow. The people behind Han Sen did not come with him, and they remained on their current route, being chased by the raven. Han Sen ignored them and focused his attention on giving pursuit to the Red Cloud donkey as fast as he could. The Red Cloud donkey was a scary foe, but at least you could watch its attacks and dodge them if the need arose. The same could not be said for the raven. But with Han Sen and Queen now preoccupied with the donkey, it was unlikely the raven would follow them. It would instead opt for the greater party that was fleeing in a straight line down the mountain. By trading one foe for a lesser foe, Han Sen and Queen had a chance of making it out alive. For Queen to come up with this idea in the midst of their current situation was impressive, and this ability to come up with such a strong strategy on the fly was an invaluable asset. As Queen continued to run, so too did the Red Cloud donkey. Han Sen was not far behind. It wasn't long before they were a fair distance from Chen Ran and his people, who had now disappeared beyond a ridge on the trail they followed. It was a grand relief for the Raven not to continue following the other party. Clearly, it had allowed for the donkey to take care of Queen and Han Sen. Han Sen was immeasurably happy that they had figured a way out of their predicament. The Red Cloud donkey was clearly inferior in power to the Raven. The predictability of its attacks and movements was particularly helpful. This was far better than dealing with the Warping Raven. Queen used Heavenly Go to keep changing her direction as she fled, dodging the donkey over and over again. She may not have been able to fight back, but at least she wasn't going to be killed. As Han Sen followed, he witnessed the clouds of the donkey begin to rise and mask itself. Its shape now started to resemble a horse built from puffy clouds. All of a sudden, it jumped a whole 10 meters and arrived behind Queen. Its sudden acceleration disrupted the rhythm of Queen's Heavenly Go. Although she was still able to avoid the donkey's attacks, the gap that had been closed meant she could no longer escape from it. The situation looked bad. Han Sen jumped on top of the Red Cloud donkey. While airborne, he summoned his peacock crossbow and loaded a Z-class bolt from his quiver. With great speed, he fired 3 bolts at the donkey. 3 Z-class bolts became 3 flashes of explosive wrath, striking the donkey in separate spots. Without sparing time to look at the results, he leapt off the donkey and resumed his run. The Red Cloud donkey squealed as the 3 bolts hit, and it screamed when the fire ravaged its body. They may not have torn its skin, but they were powerful enough to damage it. The Red Cloud donkey expelled air from its nostrils in anger and turned around to chase after Han Sen. The red clouds were terrifying, and in 3 steps, it had managed to get behind him. Han Sen's skills were not inferior to Queen's, but they weren't much stronger. Han Sen stopped running to handle the donkey. With the time Han Sen had bought her, Queen managed to gain a decent lead. She turned around and shouted towards the donkey. When it heard her voice, its eyes turned red again, and it resumed its pursuit of her. Neither of the two could compete with the donkey, but with both of them drawing its attention back and forth, the donkey remained confused and distracted. It ran between them, growing increasingly angry. Further and further Han Sen and Queen went, with neither of them sustaining a single wound. But no matter what they did, they couldn't lose their tail. They could not harm it either, for its skin was incredibly tough. Escaping it through speed alone was impossible. This isn't going too well. If the Raven killed the rest and decides to make its way over to us, we're dead too. Han Sen shouted to Queen. There is no other option, Queen answered, not displaying a single flicker of emotion. Do you remember the bones of the guardian hound? Creatures never dare approach it within a kilometer. Perhaps we should attempt to reach there?
Han Sen suggested.
Sure, Queen answered without hesitation. She aligned her destination to the Garden of Bones they had visited on their ascent. Although they were unsure whether or not it could repel super creatures, it was worth a try. Their options were fairly limited. After all, they merely hoped that they were able to reach their proposed sanctuary before the Raven had finished picking off the rest. And in regards to the Red Cloud donkey, despite its anger and power, it was little more than a pest if they cooperated together. Because they had departed the trail they took to ascend the mountain, they had to run around for a while to find where the bones lay. Fortunately, the donkey continued to kick and scream the entire way, which frightened off any other creatures that might have dared to interrupt their baiting of the hellish mule. It saved them a lot of trouble, and luckily, their worst fear did not materialize. By the time they reached the remains of the guardian hound, the Raven remained out of sight. But when Han Sen breached the kilometer radius of the bones, the donkey did not break off its pursuit. It still chased them with the same fervor it always had, which made Han Sen and Queen furrow their brows in unison. Han Sen and Queen continued on their current trajectory, silently praying the Raven wouldn't show up. But when they reached the Garden of Bones, they noticed the donkey's reluctance to approach. That pleased them both, because they knew ordinary creatures weren't willing to go within a kilometer radius of the bones. It seemed that the radius was merely reduced for super creatures, and they would instead not dare to go within 10 meters of the bones. Han Sen and Queen jumped between the skeleton's ribs as the donkey remained outside, neighing in anger and turmoil. It seemed to be afraid of something. Han Sen breathed a long sigh of relief and rested up against a bone. He looked towards the nervous donkey, which wasn't daring to draw nearer, and said, "I wonder what creature these bones belong to? It must have been a majestic thing to make super creatures fear its remains. Well, we can't stay here for long. After a brief rest, we must move on quickly." Queen sat down to rest with her eyes closed.
Han Sen nodded.
He knew they could only rest for a short while, despite the fact that their gene locks had been on for too long, sapping their bodies of energy. Had he not thought of coming here, though, they may not have had the chance to rest at all. They weren't sure whether or not the raven was planning to make an appearance. With its murderous intent, they knew for sure they'd be trapped between the bones for a long time if it did. But it wasn't long before they heard the sound of rapid footsteps. A flicker of shadows appeared, revealing the approach of Chun Ran and his people. When they saw Han Sen and Queen, they were a bit shocked. The Red Cloud donkey was frustrated after losing its target, but seeing Chun Ran and his people arrive, quickly looked delighted. Fortunately, they were all able to evade the manic mule and reach the ribcage. The faces of Han Sen and Queen dropped when they noticed the raven was still pursuing Chun Ran, who had now just let it near. It landed on a withered tree nearby and watched them coldly. "If I'd known you'd be showing up, I would have kept running." Han Sen's heart sank into depression once again. He didn't expect to see Chun Ran and his people ever again, imagining they would have been killed by the raven long before they reached the Garden of Bones. Chun Ran and his people weren't looking well, but at least they had not sustained any injuries. Only 5 people remained, but it was better than what Queen and Han Sen had been projecting. If they had been able to make it here under the ravenous pursuit of the raven, something was not right. Something must have happened. "Old Chun, I am surprised. How did you get here?" Han Sen looked at Chun Ran and asked. "It is difficult for me to explain," Chun Ran sighed, dismissing an explanation. Han Sen knew it would be useless to ask again, if Chun Ran wasn't willing to tell him what had happened. He looked outside the ribcage and saw the donkey wandering around in circles, letting out the occasional neigh. The raven made no sound. It remained perched on the tree it had landed on and simply continued to watch. "It is fortunate they won't attack us in here, but I don't see them letting us go anytime soon. I could imagine them waiting us out, watching as we starve to death or die of dehydration. Do you have any ideas, old man?"
Han Sen asked.
"There are 2 most wretched creatures out there. What do you think I can do? Let us remain here for some time, so we may see what becomes of them. For all we know, they'll become bored and eventually decide to move on," Chun Ran said. Han Sen did not ask anymore, so he returned to Queen's side, where she continued to rest with her eyes closed. Activating her gene lock for such an extended period of time was almost too much for Queen. She was not like Han Sen, who possessed Heresy Mantra and Jade Sun Force, and so her stamina and durability were not as great. It was fortunate she did not collapse during their escape. The group of 7 were now stuck between the bones. They waited an entire day and night, and still their wardens remained. The mule hovered about aimlessly while the raven sat on the tree in silence, watching them. Their faces looked incredibly glum. Han Sen did not know what to do. They knew whoever exited the shelter of the bones first would be killed by the combined force of 2 super creatures. There was no way around that. Leaning against the bones, Han Sen suddenly felt a pulsing sensation come from his chest pocket once more. He had almost forgotten about the gourd's existence due to the situation they had found themselves in. When he took it out from his pocket, the beating stopped. As Han Sen fingered it and examined it, nothing out of the ordinary happened. What a strange gourd. Han Sen didn't return it to his chest pocket just yet, and so he continued to hold it. If anything happened this time, he'd be ready to inspect it. The Red Cloud donkey and raven were incredibly patient, refusing to abandon the prey they had chased here. A few more days passed and dehydration began to kick in. No one had any water left, and they couldn't leave the safety of the bones. If this continued, more people were going to die. Brother Han, it looks to me as if they're not leaving. We have to do something soon. Chen Ran walked towards Han Sen, lowering his voice to talk with Han Sen. If you have an idea, then I'm all ears. Han Sen knew it was only a matter of time before Chen Ran would come talk to him again. We are famous evolvers. It'd be quite the gaffe if we were discovered to have died of thirst here, trapped between these bones. After that, Chen Ran continued to say, but these bones are scattered across many kilometers. If we split into 2 teams and run both ways, we may have a chance. What do you think? I suppose we could do that, but what will the teams be? Han Sen thought what Chen Ran was saying made sense. The donkey was nearer the tail of the guardian hound. People who ran that way would be at a big disadvantage. There was every possibility that both super creatures would attack that place, too. This is my plan, and I won't needlessly put any of you at risk. I want you all to run out the front while I take the back. Chen Ran sighed. He then said, but I will do this under one condition. Please tell me. Han Sen was surprised Chen Ran was planning to do something so selfless. Su Dongjin and the others are my brothers. I am hoping you will take them with you. I am the strongest here, and I am willing to exit via the tailbone and provide you all with the time you need to flee this wretched place, Chen Ran said. Old Chun, Su Dongjin and the others were touched, trying to bring words to their mouths. There is no need for you to say anything. I have made my decision. You have followed me for a long time, and there is little more I can teach you. There is little more I can do for you, except this. Besides, I'm a small target. Perhaps by the time the day is through, I'll be the one owing you, Chen Ran smiled. Chen Ran insisted. Su Dongjin and the rest of the followers then went with Han Sen and Queen to the skull, while Chen Ran went alone to the tailbone. They both set a timer, and when the time came, both teams would run. The raven continued to watch them, as if it lacked the motivation to move. The red cloud donkey now drifted over to Han Sen's side, which had more people, and neighed at them every now and again. Seeing the red cloud donkey come closer, Su Dongjin felt at ease. If it was the raven that chose to come after them, the danger would be far worse. There was a chance of surviving the pursuit of the murder donkey, but not the raven. If it was the raven that chose to be upon them, there would be no hope of survival. Although they felt great remorse for the selfless deed Chen Ran had proposed, they each wanted to live. And it was because of this they were thankful in their hearts and gratefully relieved, as well. When the timer reached 0, Chen Ran shouted, "Run!" Chen Ran bolted out from beneath the bones as fast as the morning light. Seeing Chen Ran run, Su Dongjin's vigor was reinstilled. He and his people left their end of the skeleton, too. The queen was about to leave with them, but Han Sen pulled her back. She turned to him with a bewildered look, not understanding why he did not want to run. But quickly, the queen realized what was happening. The raven had taken flight, but its target was not Chen Ran. It had flown towards the skull. Su Dongjin and his people had already made their departure, but the donkey was already on their heels. It prevented their return to the safety of the skeleton. With no way of turning back, they had no choice but to continue on their way down the mountain as they had planned. The queen turned back to look at Chen Ran and noticed he had already run a distance of 200 meters. It looks like the raven follows the larger crowd. The queen frowned at the thought. Bollocks!
Han Sen coldly sighed.
Chen Ran, that old bastard. He played us. The tail may have looked to be a more dangerous exit at first, but look closely. Would the skeleton of a creature this large only have a tail that was a few meters in length? It is broken off. The rest of the tailbone most likely resides below the soil, and that's why Chen Ran was happy to head in that direction. We may not have noticed it, but the creatures are most likely able to sense it. That's why they have favored chasing us. The queen was mortified. He led his own people to a slaughter? Now, the queen was beginning to understand the situation, as much as she would have liked not to. Chen Ran was willing to sacrifice his own followers for just a bit more time in his attempt to escape. That asshole. The queen couldn't help but swear. It would have been okay if Chen Ran tricked them alone, but it was a wretched thing to betray the people you have sworn to lead and nurture. He was insane. A man willing to do whatever it took to survive. Don't worry, though. The way he did this has given us a chance to survive. Han Sen said coldly, Watching Chun run off witut stopping. The queen acknowledged what he meant. Standing inside the ribcage, they had nowhere to go. When they heard screams from afar, it told them Su Dongjin and his people were meeting a grisly end. After 10 minutes, the screaming stopped. They must have all been killed. After the raven and the red cloud donkey were finished with them, they returned. They coldly watched Han Sen and the queen, who continued hiding between the bones of the ribcage. Believing that they were not willing to make an exit anytime soon, the duo of bloodthirsty creatures took off in Chen Rant's direction. I will count to 100. When I say 100, we run out together from the skull. This will be our only chance of escape. Han Sen started counting up. He unlocked his gene lock to keep track of where the raven and the donkey were. The fact they had gone off after the treacherous Chun ran brought a modicum of gladness to their hearts. Once the monsters had gone far enough, Han Sen was prepared to make one last run for escape alongside the queen. When he counted to 100, he was no longer able to see where the raven and donkey were. Acknowledging they had to be a great distance away by now, Han Sen knew it was time. They both darted out from beneath the bones like arrows. A little while later, Han Sen's heart felt as if it was going to leap out of his chest. Tugging on the queen's hand, he yelled at her to go back. The queen looked around and did not see any nearby danger, but she had come to trust Han Sen's judgment a lot. Without hesitation, she returned to the skull with him. As Han Sen retreated, he looked around himself to confirm whether or not there was any danger but could not see anything. Still, he trusted his instincts, and his instincts were telling him to turn back. There was a danger of some immediacy in the area, and it was something that could kill him. Running as fast as he could back to the bones, the feeling of danger began to choke him. It was getting stronger and stronger. With his gene lock at max capacity, the sense of impending doom was unbearable. In the next moment, a bright light flashed by Han Sen's neck. He didn't hear anything, but he jumped forward. That was when he saw the looming black shadow that had crept over him. Blood gushed like a bouquet of flowers. Han Sen felt as if his back was burning. He suspected a bone in his back had been broken. But the wound was the least of his concerns right now, as he rolled and climbed towards the bones of the ribcage once more. It was a life-or-death gambit, and what had seemed like a short distance to traverse now went on and on instead. The raven was furious at its inability to finish off Han's senator. It flapped its wings and disappeared once more. When it reappeared again, the wing blades of Han Sen's nemesis sliced against the back of Han Sen's neck. Han Sen's heart let out a cry. It's over. The raven was too powerful, and its speed denied him the ability to dodge. But at that precise moment, when it appeared Han Sen was about to lose his head, the dried vines that strangled the bones came to life. They were each like toxic snakes, lashing out at the raven that had drawn too near to the ribcage. They trapped the beast, and though it pecked and swung its wings as hard as it could, the raven could not cut its way free. Han Sen felt a chill. The raven had wanted to kill Han Sen so much, and now its body was being dragged into the ribcage he had previously sought shelter in. The gourd vines were choking the life out of it as it struggled to get free.
Han Sen frose.
He had never expected the seemingly lifeless vines to have so much power enough to restrain a super creature such as that.
Now Han Sen understod.
The creatures weren't afraid of the bones. They were afraid of the vines that were wrapped around them. Having managed to remove the gourd from the vines earlier, Han Sen hoped the seemingly sentient vines did not think poorly of him. In Han Sen's chest pocket, the gourd began to pulsate once more. This time, it was stronger than ever. Bringing out the gourd to hold in his hands, he really did feel like it was a heartbeat. Han Sen now knew for sure that this was no trick of his mind. The weak pulse was like the heartbeat of a baby. It may have been faint, but it was life all the same.